Welcome to the Produce on Purpose podcast. I'm Randy Adkins, your host, author, teacher, speaker, and lifelong learner. Today, we have Robert White. Robert White is a renowned entrepreneur, leadership trainer, and author with a career spanning over 5 decades. He's best known for founding and leading several successful companies in personal development and leadership training industry. Throughout his career, White has authored the book Living an Extraordinary Life. He's delivered compelling speeches and executive coaching sessions, delivered expertise in transformational leadership and team effectiveness. He's worked with over 500,000 individuals and 1,800 corporations. Robert White's extensive experience and innovative approaches to personal development and leadership training have made him a respected figure in the industry with a legacy of helping individuals and organizations achieve extraordinary results. Hey, Robert, how are you today? And welcome to the Produce on Purpose podcast.
Randy, my day has improved greatly by spending some time with you and your listeners, so I'm great and delighted to be here.
Well, it is definitely fantastic to have you on, and I'm looking forward to some of the great wisdom that you'll have to share with us. So you have experienced some significant personal challenges, including overcoming poverty and health issues. How did these early experiences shape your approach to leadership and personal development?
You know, one of the things that attracted me to your program, Randy, was that word purpose. And one way to talk about my life is a series of evolving purposes that even when I wasn't aware of what my purpose was, didn't even really understand the term, even being quite young and naive and uneducated, perhaps ignorant comes to mind. But later I looked back and I realized that I always functioned from a level of purpose. I just wasn't aware of it for a long time. And the first purpose that I had, and I think this might be true for your listeners and viewers, is that the purpose came out of a life experience, which was poverty and abuse. And I've noticed that in life and working with people and looking at my own life, is that and I'm oversimplifying this to say that we might go in one of two directions if we start out with a somewhat rough beginning. One would certainly be to go hide from life, to retreat from life, to become a permanent victim, to become a permanent, this kind of poetic expression I read recently, the vassal of the state, being taken care of by family or taken care of by the government, and not supporting ourselves. So that kind of rough beginning can cause people, and also to get into addictions, to alcohol or drugs, or even to things like shopping or having the latest new car. Addictions show up in both a hard way and a soft way, in my experience. So that's one choice that unfortunately many people make. And other people, and I'm one of that group, decide at a very young age, I've had enough of this, that there's a better life out there. And I look back to, I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which was at that time just over 50,000 people. The football stadium was bigger than the population of the city. And It's true, by the way. And I've said this to people, I'm not sure that I really communicated very well, but the city of Green Bay took care of me. There were people who saw something in me, I think. Most of them are no longer with us. I can't check this, but if I look at their actions, one family, the parents of a friend of mine, included me on a vacation to Yellowstone and South Dakota to the monument, and exposed me to some beautiful country, the western part of the U.S. for the first time, exposed me to staying in a hotel for the first time in my life, that exposed me to eating in a restaurant for the first time in my life. uh, riding in a nice car that long trip across country, and
Right.
also exposed me to people who loved each other and loved their son and included me in all of that. And I have several examples like that. I spent a couple of summers, like 2 or 3 weeks during the summer, with another family, again, a friend of mine, an extremely wealthy family. They had what they called a cottage on the actual bay, Green Bay. There's a peninsula between Green Bay, the body of water, and Lake Michigan. And they were
Okay.
on the bay side, which is the expensive side and the better water side and all that stuff. Their cottage had 32 rooms.
Right.
No, I had never,
Sounds like a mansion, but
yeah, I'd never seen anything like that. And they owned the one next door, where Grandma lived. And on rainy days, we'd go play cards with her, and she would give us $100. Now, $100 back then was, an unheard of amount of money. And every time she gave us the $100 to play cards with her, she won the 100 back. I hadn't been around people like that
yeah.
who were wealthy and enjoying their money. They had 5 boats out in front of us, different kinds of boats. Um, and all of that, I'm kind of talking about things and trips, but there was a spirit that I was exposed to.
Right.
People of faith who had done well in life and were uh, living a really different life than the one I was living day to day. And that gave me a start that I didn't appreciate until later. But the purpose statement that I started living from was, I'll never be poor again.
Ah.
So I started at 8 years old selling magazine subscriptions door to door and greeting cards door to door. By the
Mhm.
time I was 12, I had a paper route. I shoveled snow. I cut grass in the summer. Uh, I was always doing something so that I had spending money. Uh,
Right.
and actually started semi supporting my family with all these different things that I did. And a turning point for me is that when I was 12 years old, I won a writing contest, an essay contest in Green Bay, run through the schools. So I won for the city. And so the prize was a bicycle, uh, a Schwinn bicycle with all the bells and whistles and just beautiful. That was great. But the other prize, I didn't think it was a prize. It was to go to a radio station and read my uh, essay on the air during morning drive time. So a teacher accompanied me. We went to a radio station, and Randy, I fell in love at 12 years old with
Right.
with radio. All those lights and flashing lights and buzzers and equipment and the kind of stuff that men tend to be attracted to. Admittedly,
Lots of buttons.
a lot of buttons. And here's this guy sitting in a little booth to interview me, but he's talking to thousands and thousands of people. And somehow
Yes.
it was like a romance. When I say I fell in love, I really did. So as I was leaving, I asked if I could come back and hang around and observe. I don't remember the language I used. I just remember really scared asking that question at 12 years old. And they said no, that their insurance prevented that. Somebody, a 12-year-old hanging around. Okay. And as I'm leaving, the lady who was the receptionist for the radio station stopped me and said, I overheard the conversation. And, our competitor down the street has an open atrium hall with glass walls on one side, the business operations of radio, and on the
Hmm.
other side, the studios, the control engineers, the announcers, and so on. And anybody can go into that atrium and observe the operations there. So I spent 2 years almost every Saturday spending 4 to 6 hours hanging out in that atrium, watching
Wow.
the operation of the radio. They had speakers, of course, so I could
Right.
hear what was being put out over the air. but I could also see how everything was working. And what that led to, I did it because I just loved it. Uh, I mean, I see some kids recently. The daughter of a friend of mine, I gave she and one of her friends a ride to the skate park.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I mean, you see incredible young people having so much fun learning a skill. And I did that with radio. I didn't know I was doing that, but I did it. And
Yeah.
and then when I was 14 years old, I'm in school and I get called to the principal's office. Right, that's never a good thing. So I remember being scared again,
Yeah.
apprehensive. And they sat me down and they said, "We have a call from this radio station that I had been hanging out in. They networked around and figured out who I was. They had never asked, but obviously they saw me every Saturday for 2 years, and uh, they kind of adopted me. Sometimes they'd bring me a Coke,
Right. Right.
something, some little thing, some a candy bar, stuff like that, and but I don't recall ever giving them my name. They never asked. So I don't know how they found me, but they did. And what I learned later was this station actually had done something that today would be illegal and they'd get fired, they'd get sued for it. They fired all of their control engineers in a labor dispute. The
Oh,
control engineers created a union, so they just fired them all.
wow.
I think you'd get sued today.
I'm pretty sure that would happen today. You know, the union would be have some rights.
Right. And so the announcers were, they call it running your own board, the control room. And it's hard. It's hard to be the announcer and run the engineering side of radio. And so they're complaining like crazy and they've got to hire somebody. And somebody said, "What about that kid that hangs out here?" And so I started working nights and weekends, originally mornings, early mornings, for the radio station as a control engineer. And I didn't know as much as I needed to know, but again, some very generous announcers allowed me to make some horrible mistakes. I mean,
Yeah.
rewinding a tape on the air, you know, that kind of thing. You know,
Right.
forget to turn the volume down, hit rewind, and it goes, like that. So, but I figured it out pretty quickly because I loved it, and I did actually learn a lot watching from the atrium, and then I got lucky in a strange kind of way. My father, unfortunately, was an alcoholic, and I knew something about drunks. And the first guy that I worked for, morning man, the guy that made the most money at the station, because morning drive time is where they make their money.
Right. Right.
Then and now, by the way. Uh, and he drank. So he was the guy who would come in the morning pretty hungover and with a beer can in his hand at 6 a.m., you know.
Wow.
And there was a routine about AM radio at that time that, you actually kind of would surprise a lot of people today, but, you started by playing the national anthem at 6 a.m. sharp. Or you have to get there at 5 to turn all the equipment on and warm it up,
Right.
and get ready for the day. But I played the national anthem, and then I would, we had a syndicated service that did the farm reports. This is northern Wisconsin dairy country, so the price of milk and cheese and alfalfa and all that stuff. So I tune into that. So, and then there'd come a time where you have to read the weather report, and that had to be live. And so I would do that because this guy just got later every day,
Right.
you know.
So, so
Out,
here you are taking on more and more responsibility
yes.
over time. Wow.
That was when I was 15 years old. And we finally found out when the general manager woke up every morning. It was 6:45, and I was still on the air. And so the emergency phone starts flashing. There's no ringing phones in a radio station, just flashing lights. And it's the general manager saying, "Where is?" And they mentioned this guy's name. And I said, I don't know. He's not here yet. So they fired him. And they hired
Yeah.
somebody else. But at the same time, they gave me originally a Sunday night show, and then Saturday and Sunday nights, and then weeknights and Saturday and Sunday. So that by the time I was 17, I had the highest rated radio show in the state of Wisconsin, uh,
Wow.
because the audience back then was teenagers
Yeah.
or young people, and in their 20s also, because that's you didn't have iPods and tape players and all that stuff back then.
Right.
Radio, everything, and TV was for old people. You know, it was they wanted to hear the hits. So I was a top 40 DJ, and then did what called record hops and personal
Yeah.
appearances and riding in the 4th of July parade in the Oscar Mayer Wiener mobile.
There
Uh,
you go. Wow. So
so
you had some pretty interesting experiences growing up. Now it sounds like you said multiple times exposure, 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 and also the idea that you didn't know everything up front, which I always find interesting in our education system, that you have to know everything up front, or you end up being saying that that's a failure. Sounds like you've learned a way to kind of navigate through life early on, where it was there's failures, however you learn through those, and exposure. What did you find a tie as you've gotten to this place between being able to experience areas of life and exposure that has helped you to get to where you are now?
absolutely, and I'll tell you a failure part of that also. When I was 17 and had that show, I made more money than my father had ever made in a year, and supported my family. He had died when I was also. That's the other thing that happened at 14, was that he
Mhm.
died, and that just increased our poverty, lost the source of income, and so in terms of learning, in that year, I graduated from high school, and we had 300 students in our graduating class, and I graduated number 6. And I called my mother that they had moved back to the South. I was living with another family, another blessing in my life.
Mhm.
And, at that time, making a long distance phone call was a big deal, and it was expensive. And,
Yeah.
but I did. I called her to brag a little that I graduated number 6 out of 300,
Mhm.
and that I was named most likely to succeed. I was a commencement speaker, the commencement speaker for my class, and elected by my fellow students because of the
Right.
radio thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the kid from the wrong side of the tracks, the kid that's wearing used clothing to school, uh, and uh, and all of that, became quite well known because of radio. And and when I said to my mom, I was number 6 out of 300, her response was, "Why weren't you number 1?"
Oh wow.
So, violent as she was, as angry as she was about life and what life had handed her, I think, as negative as she was, as critical as she still had expectations for me.
Mhm.
And again, I didn't realize how valuable that was until later. Uh,
Yeah.
and she also taught me a lot about accountability,
Oh.
because she was widowed 3 times. She buried 3 husbands. My father was the last one, the third one. The family joke was it was her cooking, but that's a terrible thing to say. Uh, but she never complained. And I was
Right.
these lessons about accountability. And today, Randy, and I mean, I've written a book on accountability. I teach
Yeah.
it. I
Yes.
to the greatest degree possible, I live it. And that all started with my mother, even though I was unconscious about it.
Right.
And the other thing that happened that was significant was that I actually would have been valedictorian of my class, except I received one C in the 4 years of high school.
Mm.
Can you guess what the subject was that I got a C in?
What was that subject? Was it?
It was it was I've got the #1 radio show. Uh, I'm the commencement speaker, all of that stuff. But I couldn't get up in front of 22 students and speak face to face.
It's
I
very different. Yeah.
I could work in a booth, and when my book came out a few years ago, I was so nervous because I built these businesses from behind the scenes, and
Right.
a book is a very public thing, so I was really scared. And then, people like uh, uh, Jimmy Colano, the co-founder of Career Track, the biggest seller of one-day seminars in the world, loved the book and bought all kinds of them for his staff and his friends and his family. The the other famous authors and trainers and people in our industry loved it, and it just blew me up,
Yes.
and I started noticing that people would say, "I love your book. I want 20 copies. I want 50 copies," all that kind of thing. And then they would say, "But I'm disappointed in one thing."
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I would ask, "What is that?" And they would
Yeah.
say, "The book is not about you and your extraordinary life." By that
Right.
time, I had 1,300,000 graduates of these high impact experiential learning events. I had lived abroad for 23 years of my working life. I traveled all over the world. I'd given millions of dollars to charity. I lived in a 14,500 square foot house and had my own jet. All these
Right.
wonderful things that happened. And they expected the book to be about that. And it wasn't. It was about our graduates and how they interacted with our training.
Right.
It was their stories. And I
Yes.
believe that's why it's become a bestseller. Is it's not about me. What I kept secret for a long time, Randy, was there's one chapter that was about me, and it
Mm-hmm.
speaks directly to your question about how, what I learned then that shows up today. And
Yeah.
that chapter is headlined, The Most Limiting Belief in the World. You are
Ah.
not enough. You are not enough.
Yes.
And
Right.
that was my secret. Now, it also motivated me that
Mm-hmm.
not being poor, not being enough, drove me then and for many, many years. And the publishing of the book and right around that period, all that success, I started waking up most mornings thinking, um, God has something in line for me that I haven't done.
Right.
God has
Ah.
some purpose, that there's something out there. I'm living in this beautiful home. I've got the woman of my dreams. I've got 2 birth children, 2 adopted children, 2 special needs kids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm skiing. I'm traveling around the world with the late John Denver. I've got everything: the big house, the jet, the whole thing. And yet I'm waking up most mornings in a disquieting way,
Right.
thinking God is speaking to me somehow and telling me that and when I was traveling with the late John Denver, he would do a concert one night, and then the next night we would do this event, the
Mm-hmm.
called Higher Ground. It was about creating a sustainable future for the planet. 4.5 hour program, and he and
Right.
I co-led it, and it meant on his concert night, John would get off stage 10:30 or 11 o'clock, and for him
Mm-hmm.
it's like 9 a.m. He's just been in front of 15 or 20,000 people, and he's all excited. I want to go to bed. So we had so many nights like that. Uh, but some wonderful, deep conversations. And I remember
Hmm.
the night that he kind of looked at me kind of funny. I said, "What's that look about?" And he said, "You think you're a pretty big deal." I said,
Oh,
"Well,"
wow.
I said, "I don't think so, John. I think I'm a reasonably humble person." He said, "No, secretly you think you're a pretty big deal, but you haven't done what God put you here for."
Wow.
And
That's
then,
amazing.
and I never told him about the morning sessions with myself. I
Right.
didn't, I didn't tell anybody. You
Hmm.
know, living a great life. Well, how can I complain? How can I think this is not it? And
Yeah.
I think for uh, the two things that I want to share at this point in my life is that we always have a choice, no matter what kind of a beginning we have or a midlife event. We always have
Yep.
a choice, and we can choose to take responsibility for our life and for what comes next, or we can descend into this victim role, and we can grow closer to God, or we can run away from Him. You know, these are choices, and
Yes,
also we can change our choices at any
we
moment.
can.
You know,
Yes.
we can take
And,
it,
and it's,
start listening in a different way, start being more awake, maybe spending more time in nature or with quality people and
yeah,
generating quality conversations. But we always have that choice. And then we also have the choice to deal with these internal conversations like, I am not enough. I mean, I have one semester of college, and then I had
hmm,
the first of three heart attacks. I have uh, I have a lot. I'm not disciplined in some ways. I struggle with my weight. You know, I've been tremendously good at getting married to,
right.
to some wonderful women. I've been horrible at staying married. I mean,
Hmm.
I make a lot of mistakes. I'm not a
Yeah.
perfect person, except perhaps in the eyes of God. And uh, that what I'm pretty good at, though, is staying awake. Notice
Hmm.
my environment, noticing the people around me, noticing my own process, and owning it all. Um,
Being responsible for
being
all that's
it
there.
all. I mean, that's how I
Yeah.
got into the training business. I went to a training. It woke me,
Right.
changed my life, and I thought I want more people to do this. I think the world would be a better place if everybody woke up to this, and so that's guided me through the year.
And it allowed you to create. So you have ARC International, where you've graduated over 500,000 participants, and that's a part of, I guess, what you're doing. And when you say God has a purpose for you, what was that specific purpose that He was telling you had to do after you've kind of gained all of this fanfare and all of these other things that seem all external? What was he telling you?
It was, well, first of all, just on a personal level, and I know from our prior conversations, I can share this with you and your listeners. And so the first purpose that I have in my life, and the overriding purpose, is to grow closer to God.
Hmm.
And on the action side of things, it's to expose the maximum number of people to a transformational uh, experience that
Yeah.
creates a sustainable future for them and for the planet. And
Yes.
so I do that through mentoring. I do it through coaching. Big thing is doing team trainings because
Hmm.
uh, what I've learned. I mean, we had a huge personal growth business. You know, between my original company, LifeSpring, and Arc International, and now Extraordinary People, that's
Hmm.
1,300,000 graduates, and uh, the biggest thing that we do is prepare them to live a better life.
Right.
And all of it's the way it shows up. I mean, a lot of it is about leadership, a lot of it in your family, leadership in your company, no matter what your role is,
Right.
that you lead from wherever you are, leadership in your faith, leadership in your community, leadership in the world, that a person can make a difference. We're not just
Right.
a clump of cells. You know, um, we've we've got, in addition to the doing side of life, we have a being side of life. And,
Yes.
well,
And that's important to understand that being side of life and understanding kind of how we impact the world and express the actual purposes that we actually have in this life. And it sounds like you've come to that place where you're sharing that with many and helping to provide that transformational um, piece of life based on all of these trainings and all that you have brought into place with all these different people. Sounds like you've done an extraordinary life. You've kind of done some cultural adaptations by living in Asia and other areas. What do you find to be one of the areas that to be a leader that we have to really get into to truly lead? Because there are a lot of people that are following or watching everything around them. What is one of those areas that we can really utilize as leaders?
uh, the biggest thing I've already, I guess, mentioned it is to wake up. That the biggest company that I founded and led was ARC International, and we had 15 offices in 7 countries, and um, we did really well as a business, but we made a real difference in the lives of hundreds of thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
And that company, ARC, is an acronym, ARC. And uh, I had 3 different companies. I had a little personal growth company, I had a sales training company, and I had a consulting company headquartered in Tokyo. And I was looking for, you want to build a brand. You're a little tiny company, 3 little tiny companies. You want to build a brand. And I went to a business luncheon where the speaker talked about how he named his company. It happened to be Sony, the giant electronics company.
Right.
The
Yeah.
founder came and spoke to our business group in Tokyo. And somebody asked him from the floor, how did you choose the name Sony? And it comes from sonus, the Latin for sound.
Right.
Because originally they were just about sound, but he saw the future and he knew somehow that the company would not just be about sound.
Right.
So instead of sonus, he named it Sony,
Right.
Sony, which has no meaning except the meaning that they gave it. And
Right.
So I went back from after that lunch and I thought, I've got to find something to unite these 3 little businesses so I can sell one thing, one idea.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, we were sending Japanese trainers to America to get trained in this high impact experiential learning game because nobody had ever done it in Japan. So
Right.
we were pioneering it. And I can teach them a lot, but I can teach them everything. And my mentor was in America, Dr. John Enright, and he and a partner were doing a program called ARC, ARC. Except
Mm-hmm.
that this guy was a real academic. He was interested in the latest research project, the latest training. He never stayed at anything longer than a couple of years. So we're sending our trainers to him, and they're coming back, and they are really impressed. I'm debriefing them, and what I realized was that this ARC training was, they kind of educated me. I never did the John. I didn't do John's training. I mean, he had mentored me years before, and we stayed
Right.
in touch, right? And he's making this huge contribution to my trainers, and I'm debriefing them. And I said, well, what does ARC stand for? And they said, awareness, responsibility, and communication. So the lesson that I got out of that was I realized that's what we do. And
Right.
so I named our company after what we do. And that is,
Yeah.
we ask people to wake up, to have a
Mm-hmm.
greater level of awareness. My former wife called it a higher state of noticing,
Yeah.
but somehow was better than awareness. The same meaning, right? That you need to wake up, that you get out of your routines and see the world in a new way. Uh,
Right.
the second piece of that is the R is responsibility, that no matter what happens in your life, own it. Realize you have a voice in your future. Your
Mm-hmm.
choices are your choices. And then the final piece is communication. That, again, that's a lesson that for me started at 12 years old is, you learn how to better communicate. I mean,
Yes.
I was born in West Virginia. I came to Green Bay, Wisconsin with that horrible Appalachian accent. I got in fights every day, Randy,
Uh-huh.
every day, because of course, the new kid, you got to find something that you can tease them about.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I slugged somebody, and then they got the next time it was two people, and things were not going well for me in health. I had to learn to communicate, and that has served me well. So whether it's spoken or written or being a better listener, uh, being a better writer, and all these ways we communicate, uh, improving yourself in those three areas of awareness, responsibility, and communication. If you wanted to narrow things down to just three simple things, and this line is from my book, and it's often commented on, that life is simple. This does not mean it's easy. That awareness,
Yes.
responsibility, communication is simple. It's not easy. But if you start being a little more aware of your children, perhaps, or of your spouse, a little more aware of the economy, aware of politics, aware of religion, faith, um, just aware of nature, really noticing the seasons. Notice, that stop and smell the flowers advice is pretty good advice.
Right.
Not just a simple statement, uh, but to heighten your awareness that you start to avoid the victim culture that is so
Yes.
popular in our world today. And I heard an expression recently I really like. I mean, there's so many expressions flying at us all the time, but one I really like is somebody talked about where they were struggling with something in their life, and they said, well, I have to remember that it's a first world problem.
Yes.
You
We
know,
often have a lot of those, and exposure allows for us to understand that some of the problems that we have are not really problems. They're just,
uh,
really, it's what you're noticing, as you said.
look, I spent almost a month in Africa in the Kalahari Desert on safari, and I spent 2 weeks in the outback in Australia with the Aborigines,
Yep.
and uh, they don't have our problems, Randy.
No, very different. I've done mission trips, and to Uganda, Africa, and Honduras, and in those places, what I came back with was that a lot of the items that we have uh, just readily available to us. Why are we complaining? And the thing that I found is they were more happier than most of the people that have all of these things. They told me about their families and were excited about it, and they had more joy in their life than some of us do that live in first world areas. Wow, Robert, time just goes by quickly at this moment. And you of course shared some great nuggets throughout. I'm going to ask this last question, and we'll wrap it up. But looking back on your career, looking back on your life, what do you hope your legacy says about personal development and leadership training that you want to leave? If someone were to say, this is what Robert White's left with me, what would it be?
Uh, in Asia, I like to use humor when I present, to a staff meeting or to an audience of thousands, and humor doesn't translate well, especially to Asia. But I like to use it. And one of the things one of my interpreters taught me was tell people the punchline first and tell them it's a joke so that they'll, and everybody won't be uncomfortable about your stupid or maybe ignorant attempt to continue to use humor. So I'm going to give you the punchline last. My life, what I've learned and what I want to do with my life is contribute. We talk about in our corporate trainings, we talk about 4 levels of purpose. The first one's survival, the obvious one. You got to handle that,
Yes.
or you can't get to the others: food,
Yes.
clothing, and shelter. The second level is maintenance, that you figured out survival so that you're not concerned about it. You've got it kind of handled. And that creates the freedom for the third level of purpose, which is leisure. And by leisure, I do not mean sitting on a beach, even though that might be your choice. By leisure, we mean having your entire life, your work, your family be a source of play, a source of joy. And then the highest level of purpose is, if you've handled those first 3, you can begin to contribute with a pure heart. And so that's my goal, is to do with my life what I think God wants me to be doing with my life, and that it contributes to people and to a better world.
Awesome. Robert, it has been phenomenal having this conversation with you. Thank you for sharing all of these great nuggets with my audience. And for those who are listening, there's definitely a lot that we can take from what you have shared with us. How can my audience get in touch with you as they move forward?
Well, a lot of what I do is relatively expensive. And so I want to focus on, I think relationships are so important. So I'll focus on something that's not going to cost anybody anything, and that might create the space for a better relationship. I publish a weekly e-zine on email called An Extraordinary Minute. It's an idea that I picked up from someone else, a movie that I saw, a poem that I read, a song that I heard, uh, and then my comments on it, all designed to be read in 1 minute or less. So I do that every week, and it's free, and people can register at extraordinarypeople.com, extraordinarypeople.com. Uh, and what they're going to get immediately upon registering is a 28-page essay that I've been writing and rewriting for 30 years. I mean, it's about success generally, and it's shareable. You can share with family, with friends, with colleagues. People have used it for brown bag lunch conversations, little staff trainings, and family meetings, is to have
Yes.
everybody read it and then talk about it. There's also a little test in it that you can take to maybe give you a better idea of areas where you could focus your personal growth work instead of trying to do everything at once. So both of those are free. It puts us in relationship. Anytime you hit reply to that email, it comes directly to me, and I answer most of those comments, questions, complaints, whatever. That's my way of being in touch with people.
Well, thank you, Robert, and thank you for sharing that gift with everyone. I want to encourage everyone, please reach out to Robert. Definitely go check out all that he's done. His book, Living an Extraordinary Life, his trainings and what he's doing. Definitely, I've learned quite a bit just in our conversation. And for us to understand that, sometimes things look like failure. Sometimes things look like they're not going right. But if we go out and we learn from those failures, learn from what's going on, actually experience those pieces of our lives that many times our lives end up becoming extraordinary. We're not just living that ordinary life, and that success is just around the corner. And he shared information about his 4 levels of purpose and also ARC. I love that we'll take that away with us, that we need to wake up. We need to be aware of what's going on. We need to be responsible, that we cannot be victims of what's going on. And we need to continue to communicate. There are so many ways that we can up our level of communications and how we do things. I am so excited about this coming out and this episode being able to come out. I believe it's going to be transformative to anyone who's listening. And I want to remind everyone, no matter what you're doing, as you consistently look over your life, I want you to continue to produce on purpose.